Hello, and welcome to Pro Gaming Weekly. I'm Ben, also known as Lignar. I'm a little excited this week since this is our biggest episode yet. We have a little bit of news and a ton of highlights, but before we get into that, I want to throw out a reminder to go out to Facebook and give us a like on our page. Once we reach 100 likes, we'll pick one of those people at random for a $20 gift card at Jinx.com, so tell your friends to like us too. Feels kind of third grade to ask people to like you. Anyway, some news. David Kim posted on Blizzard's StarCraft site about balance within the game. He mentions race balance and also how different maps affect different matchups. He cites the data that Blizzard has access to that we don't, and some of the actions they're considering taking, and as you would expect, the community reacted with a certain amount of passion. Regardless of what your stance on what he said is, having the ability to gather this data is a benefit of not having LAN at things like, say, Code S. But that's a discussion for a different time. Regardless, it's possible we're going to see some changes come to build orders in certain matchups from all levels of play, from Code S all the way down to Bronze. Okay, maybe not Bronze. MLG announced Friday that Halo will be included in the spring season, but the finals will not be played live at Anaheim. The entirety of Halo will be played for the spring season on Game Battles, and registration is now open and closes May 23rd. 100% of the registration fees go into the prize pool, so the size of the pool depends on how many people sign up. This isn't the most popular decision among the Halo community, but it seems like it's this or nothing for Halo and the MLG for the time being anyway, so sorry Halo fans. Finally in news, just today we learned that Team Liquid and Fnatic have joined the GSL Team League for the upcoming season that starts May 28th and runs until August 4th. That's it for news this week. We have a lot of highlights to watch, so you may want to pause and grab a snack. Alright, let's get started.
We're going to kick this week off in the GSL Code S. Round of 16, Group C, we've got Parting versus STC. In Game 1, the STC pushes into Parting's third and doesn't manage to take the Nexus down, even though he does do a lot of damage to it. He probably should have stayed focused on the Nexus. He would have lost the biggest part of his units here, but he would have dealt such a blow to the macro. It either would have lost the game for him or won the game for him. Maybe he didn't want to take that gamble that early. The force fields here basically run him off. Look at that Nexus. It's almost dead. It's... wow. A little bit later, Parting comes in here. His own force fields work against him. They keep his Zealots out of the fight, but it doesn't really matter that much because he's got those storms. It does a fair amount of damage to keep the STC at bay while he takes down that that third. Then a little bit later, he's coming in. He's got feedbacks going. He's just got too much damage here for for STC to deal with. STC has to GG and send us on into game 2. Where STC starts with a proxy factory starport, and this is all I show of it because he does a Hellion drop in the main and he gets 4 probes and then he takes the factory and the starport home, so it's really nothing exciting to see. But he does start the harassment and the drops, which he did a lot of, and here is one dropping into the main, nothing but Marauders, and those Marauders plow through those Stalkers. The Stalkers take out the Medivacs, sure, but those Marauders fly through the Stalkers like butter. These Colossus were out of position. Marauders flank them from the back, just take them down. A little bit later here, we've got the STC dropping again in the main and pushing the third, and it seems like Parting doesn't really know which direction to go, but at the same time, the STC doesn't do that much damage to the macro. They do some unit trading, sure. He takes out a structure here and there, some pylons here and there, but he never really gets Parting behind, and Parting's just got too many storms, just too many units. The Immortals and the Colossus coming in, even though he loses Colossus, he's lost 3 or 4 Colossus at this point. It's just too much damage still. The Warp End's coming. There's not a whole lot the STC can do against this type of force, as you see here with this last round. The storms coming in, the Chargelet's heading out. He just has to run away, and while he's doing so, he GG's and gives this win to Parting in the first game of Group C play in the round of 16 in GSL Code S. Moving ahead in Group C, Code S round of 16, we've got Marine King versus TaeJa, and we got really good TVT going on here. Marine King comes in with Blue Flame Hellions and tanks, manages to push his way into TaeJa's natural, and get up here. He does a fair amount of damage to the natural. He gets his tanks up here on this high ground where TaeJa is now. Leaves a couple down there to harass that natural, and his tanks assume a defensive position. He sieges up and does a ton of damage to TaeJa. Really puts him behind economy-wise. TaeJa's not having any of that, though. He comes home. He cleans up this force, and it was actually a really interesting fight. Their upgrades were relatively even, so it came down to positioning and micro, and TaeJa seemed to have the upper hand in this particular engagement. Even though it took him a while to clean up, it still cost him more than it cost Marine King, though. He goes here, he's cleaning up the rest of Marine King's tanks, and then Marine King says, oh yeah, well, I'm going to push and I'm going to take out one of your expansions. Teja comes in to defend it, as you'll see here in a second, with a really good composition of tanks, Marines, and Marauders, but he just doesn't have enough units. Marine King has just got way too many units, and the upgrades, again, like I said, are pretty even, but it's still too much for Teja. He has to GG and head us on into Game 2. Where Marine King sets up this nasty little 3 siege tanks in the back of the mineral line there at the natural. Nothing can come down that ramp. You see when the orbital tries to land, it just gets pounded by 3 siege tanks right away. It really puts Teja behind here. Those tanks eventually get picked up by a medevac and taken home. Teja goes to push, and MKP has his tanks on the high ground. He's got tanks coming around behind to flank. He's got the Marines and medevacs down low. Teja just loses his entire army here. Marine King cleans up those Marines and then goes to get this planetary. He's got a tank up high. You'll see it there. And he's got a tank up high on the other side. They're just pounding that planetary. There's some repairs coming in, sure, but it's just not enough. The planetary goes down here when Marine King decides it's going down. He did kind of take a little bit of a risk there, but it paid off. This orbital comes in, and Teja barely saves it. Marine King almost got it. And after he gets it repaired up, he does get it back down there in that mineral line, as you'll see here in a second. But Marine King is not having any of that. He comes in. He's got way too many tanks. He leaves some tanks up on the high ground. He's got some air forces spotting for those tanks. And it just wipes out these tanks like a knife through butter. Teja has to GG and give the win in this group play to Marine King. Moving along in this group in Code S, round of 16, we've got Marine King versus Parting. Both these guys said they were jet lagged from MLG, which was the weekend before this game was played, or this match was played, rather. You wouldn't have known that they were jet lagged based on their play in their last match, but here we've got Parting keeping a little contain and harass on Marine King. He takes out a lot of tanks and medevacs. As we're seeing here, he finishes off these Marines and gets these 2 tanks with relative ease. Keeps Marine King on the ropes and keeps him on his heels a little bit, manages to not let him get out and get a third, but Marine King does eventually push him back and get that pylon down and send those forces home. Then Marine King tries to push himself, but these storms, as you can see, they're just devastating against that Terran army. Those Marines are a little squishy for storms. The medevacs do help, but they can't heal all of them up through a storm. He just manages to keep Marine King, even though Marine King's up on the high ground, he seems to have the upper hand here and keep Marine King at bay. So Marine King decides to come around the other side and try this other Nexus over here, and about the only thing he manages to do is get that pylon. These forces are just too strong and too fast. He's warping them in too quickly, and Marine King ends up having to take those forces home, and the Archons are just too good. He has to GG, and we're heading on to Game 2. Where in Game 2, Parting pulls his probes to stop this natural from being built, and then there's a lot of harassment with these kind of units, tier 1 units or workers. That Zealot we just saw, he comes up and harasses the natural. It takes a long time before MKP manages to clean this up and get his natural expansion built. I am nowhere near on this level. Mine's typically built by about 4.5 minutes. Granted, I don't have Parting harassing me either. But here we got Marine King pushing in. These force fields actually, while they look really good, actually help Marine King. They keep most of the Marines out where the medevacs can heal them. So the Marines are able to just nuke down those probes and stem up and push this force back. And, Marine King's sending in mules saying, it's over, man, it's over. The stem comes in, the medevacs keep pushing. The mules are actually helping tank a little bit of damage, and I think they're healing the medevacs too. Sends in more mules here saying, it's over, son, GG, and let's go to Game 3. So that's what he does, and we're heading to Game 3. And here in Game 3, Parting pushes pretty early. He must not have liked those mules coming down in his base there at the end of the game as that taunt. He pushes with these sentries and stalkers and has immaculate use of these force fields, keeping the Marines at bay, keeping the workers where he can just nuke them down with relative ease. He does a little bit of harass on that expansion, but not that big of a deal other than it has to lift. He doesn't take it down, though. You'll see it land here in a second, but he has great use of the force fields, keeping the Marines up high and the workers down low where he can keep killing them. He continues to push in with the sentries and the stalkers, just doing a ton of damage to the production buildings. The units that MKP has here, he's pulling his what SCVs he has left to tank some damage. And Parting gets his own little taunt in here, as you're about to see. MKP has to GG and give this win in group play to Parting, and we're moving on to our next match. Moving right along, we've got the STC versus Teja, another TVT. Very fun to watch in my opinion, not fun to play. Here we got the STC doing a proxy factory and port, and not a whole lot comes of it because here, just a few minutes after it gets built, it gets scouted. And he has to pick up and take him home, but he doesn't get the starport. I think he's waiting on a unit to build. He does get the factory lifted and takes it home, but he ends up losing the starport. And it just puts him behind. He's way behind in the army, so Teja just comes in. He lands his Vikings and gives his tanks vision, and they just do too much damage, and Teja wins because STC is just too far behind after that proxy move, and we're heading into game 2, where we've got both of them doing a Banshee harass, but Teja has 2 Banshees and ends up getting 24 SCVs killed, which really puts the STC behind in the economy. He comes in here to STC's base, lands his Vikings, and gets the turrets down, and the economy of the STC is just in shambles after this. I've never seen landed Vikings do so much wonderful damage, but I also don't play in Code S. So you get a lot of damage to the STC here. This tank comes in, and it's forcing the natural here to lift off, doing even more damage and delay to the economy. Then just a few minutes after that, Teja drops in 2 medevacs worth of units into the base, and there's not a lot STC can do except GG and give this win in group play to Teja. Here we go with a rematch between Marine King and Teja, and in game 1, not a whole lot happened until Marine King tried to push a little bit here. He got himself a little overextended, and he loses pretty much everything. He does manage to build up a decent-sized force to defend with when he gets home, but he didn't do enough damage to Teja here. He lost too many compared to what Teja lost. So when we get to this final engagement here, Teja's way far ahead. This last group of Marines and medevacs comes in. Teja sieges up. He pushes in, Marine King stems out, but it's a 2-pronged attack, and there's just too much damage here from Marine King, and he GG's, and we're heading to Game 2. In Game 2, again, not a lot happened while both players teched up and built up, and when it did start happening, Teja was dropping into the mineral line in the natural to get a harassment on that, while he's also moving that army up into the 3rd, and he ends up forcing a cancel on the 3rd, which you'll see here in a second, and Marine King comes in to defend the drop, and then he realizes he has to go to the 3rd, but he cancels that and decides he's going to send his army into Teja's base. Teja starts to go back to defend and then decides, nope, he's going to attack Marine King yet again. So Marine King ends up having to turn himself back around, as you see here, and it ends up just being way too advantageous for Teja. Marine King, while he does get some units into Teja's base, it's not enough. He doesn't have enough back home to defend. Teja is just way too ahead here. He loses, or Teja rather takes out the orbital and the natural. Marine King is too far behind in economy, and he hasn't done enough damage to the units of Teja, and he has to GG, and unfortunately for Marine King, he's going to fall down to Code A. Moving on to Group D in the round of 16 in Code S, we've got MC versus Maru, who, by the way, is the youngest player in Code S, and it doesn't show in his play. He's actually really, really good if you expected the young guys to not be. Here he distracts up front with a handful of Marines while he has this drop going in the back. He kills some Zealots and a few probes, but the big deal is he is killing that Robo, and that's putting MC's tech way behind. Scans a ramp so he knows when he needs to pull out. Manages to pick up this army and take him home. He only lost some Marines, and he got a Robo and some probes. It's a really good trade on his part. A little bit later, he pushes the 3rd here. Manages to do some MKP-like splits and micro, and manages to really minimize the effectiveness of MC's storms. Even though he does land a few, he is MC after all. He still doesn't do as much damage as he could have. and he's at the same time trying to harass around the map and keep Maru honest, but it's not really working. Maru keeps pushing here. This damage he's dealing out is just way too much. This Nexus has been damaged from a previous assault. It's going to go down. MC has to GG and head us on into game 2. In game 2, Maru goes with a 3 racks build that MC doesn't scout. So MC is not expecting a 3 racks type of build, and he doesn't expect it until he sees this small push from Maru, and MC's force fields are just too good. The sentries and the stalkers standing back at range with the zealots up front, keeping those marines pinned. At this point, MC figures out what the build is. He builds an observer and scouts it out, and he makes an adjustment after Maru takes these units home, of course. And the adjustment is he goes Colossus, as you see here. And Maru, I'm not sure if he just didn't know about these Colossus or if he was just going for broke. No matter what these force fields look like here, as long as they hold some of them back, the Colossus, now there's a third one, there's soon to be a fourth one, they just melt the bio ball that Maru sent. And he manages to not completely die. There's the fourth one. He does pick some of them up and start heading home, but then I think he realizes there's no way I can beat 4 Colossus because he's probably got another one coming. He GG's, and we're heading on into game 3. In game 3, here we see a second Stalker going down. We didn't get to see the first one. OBS didn't get us there in time, but that's a big deal for Protoss to lose 2 Stalkers in the first 7 minutes, especially in Codex level play. But a little bit later, MC's going after Maru's third. Maru brings his Marines over stems. He's got a ton of medevacs. The sentries come in with the Guardian Shield. The Stalkers blink down, but the upgrades for Maru are just too much. The medevacs are keeping these Marines alive. They push him back. Not good force fields there as he's trying to run away. The Marines just keep chasing him down, and eventually MC's army is pretty much destroyed here. So much so that when Maru goes to push into MC's third, which we're about to see in a minute, MC just doesn't have much of an army to defend with, especially with all of those Marines with stem and all of those medevacs. MC has to GG and give the win in this match play to Maru. Moving on in Group D, we've got Oz versus Squirtle, and we got some interesting harassment coming up here in Game 1. Here we have Oz stealing the gas in Squirtle's base. He lets it build completely. He doesn't cancel them, makes Squirtle destroy them. Then Squirtle comes and puts a manor pylon down here, trapping those probes and blocking those minerals where the probes have to go all the way around to the backside to mine them. Interesting harassment going on here. Ends up not being that big of a deal here because with this observer up on the high ground, these Stalkers blink here into the main while those other Stalkers are headed into the natural. He micros the ones in the main, back around, harassing the mineral line. Just runs them through, doing a little bit of damage to the economy, runs them on down through the base, down the ramp, and meets up with the ones he has in the natural. Manages to clean up a lot of stuff in the natural, blinks away, and he's completely out of range of those immortals, and he just manages to keep those Stalkers there. More are coming in, and they do get a little bit of damage from the immortals, not that big a deal, but his natural is going down, and Oz, there's no way he's coming back from that, so he GG's as it goes down, and we're heading in to Game 2. And in Game 2, we get more of a straight-up play, not this interesting harassment. These 2 Stalkers go down early from Oz. Squirtle's got a lot of Stalkers coming in here. He put some harassment on the natural. I kind of think he probably should have just focus fired that down, but he did need to get some harassment up in the main. He blinks in, some force fields come down, and basically blinks on cooldown, so those Stalkers are just going to squirm around for a little bit. Oz is buying himself some time here, but it ends up not buying him enough. The Stalkers are able to blink around, do some more damage. He eventually just pulls them back down. Now Oz is pulling his probes. So Squirtle just pulls his probes down, focuses on that natural, and Oz realizes he's too far behind, even though he's still just gasping for air. He does end up GGing and giving this win in group play to Squirtle. Moving right along in Code D, we've got Maru versus Squirtle, and this is an interesting matchup here because Maru comes in, drops in the main of Squirtle, takes out these pylons, and really puts these warp gates on hold for a while until a new pylon comes in. And during the casting, Artosis of all people said he should have had more pylons there. He comes in later with these Vikings and lands them to do some harassment, but the storms do some damage. The Vikings don't do a lot of damage, and he ends up losing them to that warp in right there, and that's key to know because Squirtle moves in knowing that there's no Vikings around to take out his Colossus. He pushes in because these Colossus, as we all know, mixed with these storms especially, can just melt bio balls. So he manages to do that there in defense, and then he comes in with these two Colossus, the Zealots, the Archons. Nothing Maru can do to fight this off, especially when the storms start hitting. GG, we're heading to game 2. Not a lot happened in game 2 until we get to this, where the storms come down, melting the bio ball along with the Colossi, but the Vikings are focusing down the Colossi. Lots of damage on both sides, but I think it kind of ended up in Maru's favor there. Squirtle ends up pushing again with, here's a slight harassment in the mineral line with the Zealots, but he pushes again here. But look at that army from Maru. The Terran has just got a huge army, despite some great storms and some decent force fields coming down. There's just not enough damage being dealt by the Protoss, and he has to pull back, keeping the storms and the force fields basically to keep the pursuit off of him. And then he comes back yet again, and this time it works. He's got those Colossi, he's got the Guardian Shield. There's just too much going on here. He gets the GG. Squirtle wins and advances on to the round of 8. Rolling right along in Group D in the round of 16 in GSL Codas, we've got a PvP with Oz versus MC. Oz brings in the DTs here, sending them towards MC. MC sees it, but he doesn't have detection, so he can't target it. So what he does is he pulls his units back and manages to throw down a good force field here to keep that DT at bay. Now, Oz did get a couple in the back of the base, but it managed to not take out MC. Not sure what happened there, but MC decides he's going to do a drop, gets this Warp Prism in, drops, and warps in some Zealots, focuses them on the Nexus, but he doesn't get the Nexus. He doesn't do enough damage, and once Oz comes in and takes down that Warp Prism, this drop is over, and MC is way behind. So MC here is just going to go for broke. He realizes he's way behind. He just pushes. There's just too much here for Oz. He's got the high ground. He's got those 3 Immortals. He's got the Guardian Shield. MC has to GG and hit us into Game 2. Game 2 was largely uneventful until this pretty early push by Oz. I think he just wanted to send MC home, but Oz blinks up and he tries to focus down on the Immortal, but there's just too much there. The Zealots up front, the Immortal in the back. He loses all of his Stalkers. He GG's, and we're heading to Game 3. Game 3 in this matchup was pretty uneventful until MC pushes with this warp in on this proxy pylon and this Colossus. The Colossus is doing a lot of damage. It's just not enough. Plus, there's the Immortal up on the high ground there who is just focusing fire on the Colossus. The Colossus does live for now. MC regroups, comes back. This battle goes on back and forth here with MC warping units in, getting pushed back, MC warping units in. It goes 3 or 4 times here. He just can't deal enough damage to really deal the knockout to Oz. And he ends up having to go home, even though he's got really good force field. He's got a good comp. Oz is just too strong here. Those Immortals are just way too strong. With this constant warp in here, it's still not enough. And here's his last push with that warp in. Oz is just pushing him back with the Guardian Shield. The force fields come in. There's not a lot MC can do here except fall back, let Oz destroy that pylon, and hope he can rebuild and fight Oz off later. And here we are looking at Oz chasing MC home. He's taking down the pylons as he goes, so MC can't warp units in behind him. But as MC's running away, he'll stop and micro a little bit. He throws down some force fields to try to buy some time, but Oz is just too strong here. MC cannot keep up. He has to GG and give this win to Oz. Our last look at GSL Codes round of 16 Group D, we've got Oz versus Maru, and Maru has a little bit of harassment going on. He lifts, but he's also got upgrades, and that harassment's pretty much meaningless. He pushes out with Marine Marauder Medevac, and in order to avoid the base trade, Oz splits his forces. He leaves his Stalkers in Maru's base, and he sends his Zealots back home. The problem with that is that Maru's got about 1 million Medevacs with that force, and if you've got that many Medevacs, Zealots do nothing. They're just going to go away. So Oz pulls his Stalkers, and Maru follows him with everything that he's got, including the kitchen sink, while he's continuing to build back home, I might add. Those Zealots do just melt. Maru does a fair amount of damage. This handful of Stalkers is still kind of harassing Maru's base, but it's just not enough. Maru's got too many upgrades. Oz does come in here, and he gets some really good storms against Maru's forces, even though it's in his base. Maru's too good with the splits, the micro. He's still got too many Medevacs. He gets a lot of the Marines there, but there's not enough. He has to GG, give the win to Maru, and take us on into game 2. Where Maru scouted and saw a gas before a gate, and the assumption is that he saw that, so he canceled his expansion in his natural and goes with these 4 proxy racks. The problem is, Oz scouts, sees that there's not a command center in the natural, probably figures out there's some proxy racks somewhere, and not too much after that, Maru realizes he's been found out. He pulls his SCVs, sends with the Marines that he can build, sends those in. Just can't do enough damage here. Had he not been found out, it probably would have worked. Would have been an interesting strat to see. But the fact of the matter is, he did get found out, and he has to GG, give this game to Oz, and send us on in to game 3. Not a lot happened in game 3 until we get relatively late in the game. Maru's pushing. He gets some really good EMPs on the Archons and the Sentries here, pushing Oz back into his base. This force field right here sends Maru away, but he comes back, gets some huge EMPs here, and manages to just absolutely destroy this force of Oz. Pushes what little bit is left back in the base, but there's really only like 1 or 2 units. But Oz is sending out Zealots, harassing all of the mineral lines of Maru, and that, I think, was probably what put him ahead. He does get these Colossus here, and he loses this base here. The only, pretty much his entire supply was in probes at this point, but he warped in a lot of Zealots, and he's got the Colossus coming in. Maru does take that base, but he loses a lot because the Colossus are there melting that bio ball, and he had lost a lot in his economy. So Oz pushes with these 5 Colossi. There's one off here to the side, and there's nothing Maru can do to fight them off. He has nothing to take him out. The 2 Vikings he had got taken out by the Archons and their anti-air, so he has to GG, give Oz the win, and Oz advances to the round of 8.
We just wrapped up a ton of StarCraft highlights, and while StarCraft is basically the king of esports, that doesn't mean there aren't other events out there, and we can't cover what we're not aware of. If you know an event that's coming up, let us know. Send us an email, progamingweekly@gmail.com, with the details. Given the amount of time it does take to put an episode together, though, we can't promise everything will get highlights, but we'll, at a minimum, put it on the ticker. Before we wrap up this week's show, just one more reminder to go out to our Facebook page and throw us a like. Spread the word so we can give away that Jinx.com gift card. That's it for me, so thanks for watching. See you next week. I think the teleprompter has helped the show, but it's also made me drink more.